Welcome, everybody, to another fantastic episode of the Three Man Rush podcast. If you are joining us today, I want to thank you. Whether you're watching on YouTube, go ahead, like, subscribe, hit the bell notification. You can be notified whenever we drop new material, which is going to be pretty often now that training camp is upon us. And if you are listening in audio format, we also want to thank you as well. Go ahead and like and subscribe on your chosen platform, whether that's, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts. So just want to give a big shout out. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Today's episode is very special. Before we jump into that, I want to introduce myself. I'm your host, Landon Oliver, here with my two co-hosts, Andrew Scott and Big Jared Holly at the bottom. What is going on, fellas?
Cheers, man. It's good. Once we're one show closer to the real thing. It's almost there.
Well, it's actually, I believe, next Thursday, a week from tonight, is the Hall of Fame preseason game. So we do get football.
That's crazy.
Next Thursday, 1 week from whenever we are recording this. Now, granted, it is the Raiders and I believe the Jaguars who are playing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's the Raiders and Jaguars. It's preseason. You're probably not going to see the starters. But, hey, look, it's football. Beggars can't be choosers. The fact that game is a week away means we are right on the cusp of the season. So yeah, I'm super excited. I hope you guys are ready for this show. If you're joining us here, we are into kind of the middle of our four. I think this is probably the midpoint of our divisional previews, which we're doing. So we've already taken care of the AFC West, the NFC West. A few days ago, we took care of the AFC East. Today, we're taking care of the NFC Least, or the whatever you want to refer to it as. It's anytime you get to talk about Daniel Jones and Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott, which he seems to be the cream of the crop here. Which I like Jalen Hurts. We'll see what happens with that, but it is not a very inspiring group conversation to kick off the division. But just to give you a rundown of how things played out last year for the NFC East, we had the Dallas Cowboys taking the division at 12-5 and then immediately getting bounced in the playoffs. We had the Philadelphia Eagles coming in second at 9-8 and then immediately getting bounced in the playoffs. Which the fact that, hey, look, you got two playoff teams in the division. So, look, congratulations. Yep. The Washington Commanders, a.k.a. the football team, a.k.a. the
unspeakable.
Yeah, we can't say it on the live because we will get canceled. But, hey, whatever their name is this year, they were 7-10 last year, bringing in third in the division. And then to round out the division, the New York Football Giants at 4-13. Joe Judge is gone, got a new coach, got a new draft pick, all kinds of cool stuff going on with the New York Giants. And I actually thought they had a really good offseason. So we're going to hop right into the New York Giants, guys. One of the better drafts to me came out of both New York teams, whether you're in the AFC or in the NFC. I think New York killed the draft. So great for them. So some notable additions, some losses, and that draft we are talking about, just to kind of give everybody a heads up. So they did sign Mark Glowinski, right guard from the Indianapolis Colts. Good luck to Glow. Tyrod Taylor brought in as well. Ricky Seals-Jones, John Feliciano, Justin Ellis, Jihad Ward, Max Garcia, brought in Matt Breida and Jordan Akins. They did lose James Bradbury, which obviously could be a pretty big loss. Logan Ryan departed, as well as Austin Johnson, Evan Ingram, Jabril Peppers, Will Hernandez, the guard. They drafted just a few years ago, Lorenzo Carter, Keon Sin, and they did, speaking of that draft that we all really enjoyed, they had guys like Kayvon Thibodeau, Evan Neal, Wandale Robinson from UK, Joshua Azuda, Cordell Flott, which was another pick I really liked, Daniel Bellinger, Dane Belton, Micah McFadden, DJ Davidson, Marcus McKethan, and Darian Beavers, rounding out the draft class for them. So obviously the big news is they didn't exercise 5th-year option on Daniel Jones. Seems like this is going to be make or break year, but they do bring in a new head coach who has a history of, they had guys like Kayvon Thibodeau, Evan Neal, Wandale Robinson from UK, Joshua Azuda, Cordell Flott, which was another pick I really liked, Daniel Bellinger, DJ Davidson, Marcus McKethan, and Darian Beavers, rounding out the draft class for them. So obviously the big news is they didn't exercise 5th-year option on Daniel Jones. Seems like this is going to be make or break year, but they do bring in a new head coach getting the most out of his quarterbacks, namely the development of Josh Allen. Uh, the big question is for both of you guys, which I'm curious on, is how do you view Daniel Jones going into this season, and do you think the head coach now, which I believe off the top of my head, I don't know why I'm blanking on it. Who's the head coach?
Brian Daboll.
Brian Daboll. Jesus Christ. It's late at night, by the way. I worked like a 12-hour shift today, so you gotta bear with me a little bit. So yeah, Brian Daboll. Do you think he can work a miracle on Daniel Jones? And do you think that this is possibly Daniel Jones' last shot as a starter? Not necessarily. I mean, we know it could be his last shot as a Giant, but do you think this is his last shot to show he's an actual starter in the league?
No, I think what the NFL is right now, Marcus Mariota is about to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. When a lot of people had him wrote off, and he'll be a starter for Atlanta. Daniel Jones has upside. He is a mobile quarterback to an extent. He can run. He got snake bit last year by a lot of injuries, man. Saquon Barkley is not the same Saquon Barkley he was his rookie year. That wide receiver core was decimated all season long. I mean, to a point where the Kenny Galladay thing was a disaster. The contract was terrible. He was hurt. I know, like, I played Dante Pettis a lot last year in DFS. Like, if that tells you anything, like, their roster was decimated. And so I think with a new head coach, new Joe Judge, I mean, yeah, we talked about Trevor Lawrence and the situation he had in Jacksonville. It wasn't much better for Daniel Jones with Joe Judge.
Well, it was a little bit safer for kickers in New York than it was in Jacksonville. So.
Well, yeah. Joe Judge also, he also, I don't know if you guys remember the analytics debate with Joe Judge. If you ever get time, go back and listen to him talk about analytics. It's hilarious. And then they literally quit in a game. Like the team gave up with him as a head coach. I don't know if he was calling the plays. There was a whole bunch of like controversy with the Giants last year. I think Daniel Jones is a decent quarterback. I think he can be a starter for certain franchises. Outside of if they have a bad year again this season, there's a very good chance they'll take a quarterback in the first round, especially with the drafts, like the quarterback coming out of the draft next season. But I do think that he could be a starter in the NFL with some team.
So me personally, I feel like they've set the offense up to where this is. I do think that this is his last shot to prove if he is more than just a bridge quarterback personally, and that's what I think he is. I think he's a Marcus Mariota. If the first name that Jared said, like not comparing their play styles necessarily, but just their kind of their career arc. Like I think that's what Daniel Jones is. I don't think he's a guy you're going to win a Super Bowl with. And I think by not exercising that option. Even if he plays decent this year, I think after this year he'll probably most likely be a bridge quarterback. But I mean, whenever it comes to Saquon, I do expect him to have a pretty big bounce back year. The injuries he has had, even though he has been dealing with some injuries, so it's not really anything where there's like a trend or a pattern to follow or anything. It's just been kind of a couple freak injuries, and he appears to be healthy, and I still believe in the talent. I still believe in the player. So with them being able to grab Evan Neal in the draft, and now having the rest of the offensive line outside of the tackle position could still use a little bit of work, but having Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal at the two tackle spots is solid. And then the playmakers, if they can just stay healthy, if Kadarius Toney and Kenny Galladay can stay on the field, and then Wan'Dale Robinson, if the incredible work he did in college can translate to the league. Daniel Bellinger, he probably won't see a lot out of him being a rookie tight end, and most rookie tight ends not named Kyle Pitts don't usually make much noise. Yeah. But having Ricky Seals-Jones in there, Daniel Bellinger, it's not a great tight end room, but it's good enough with the rest of the offensive weapons that he has around him. The improvement in the offensive line, what I will believe in will be an improvement in play calling with the new coaching staff coming in. If Daniel Jones can't get it done at this point, I think it's pretty obvious, where his career would be heading at that point. But that's not to say that if at the end of the season, if he's not the Giants quarterback, that doesn't necessarily mean that's just the last time he'll start a game in the league either. But I just don't think he'll be a guy that franchises are going after to be their next franchise quarterback or anything like that.
Yeah, I tend to kind of agree. I do think he does have some talent. So
Yeah, I will say I don't think he's as bad as he looked last year.
yeah, I agree, and especially like he has some really good talent throwing the ball deep. Like he actually has a very like successful deep ball thrower.
He
Um,
played extremely well at the beginning of last year. There was I can't remember if it was against
when he's
the
not like tripping over himself running down.
yeah.
That was
He had a game where he threw for 400 yards last year. I
yeah,
believe
he's
it
got
was
talent.
Saints.
Really like
The
I
defense.
mean, I hate to make excuses like because like I guess I am like such a quarterback guy. Like I'm always gonna look for an excuse on why a quarterback doesn't perform. But like this seems like the first actual time in his career that they actually have kind of like supported him as a quarterback, like giving him the pieces to and most notably the coaching
Yeah.
aspect of that. This seems like the first time in his career. Like I think if he possibly would have had this coaching staff or like this front office whenever he was drafted, I think we could be talking about a completely different player right now than what we are. And as we all know, which we've said it on the show a million times, like situation matters. Like situations do matter when you are, especially at quarterback. Depending on where you're drafted to, it's a big thing. It's probably the biggest part of it. So this is really the year that I'm curious to see if like it is actually like if the damage has already been done or if he's still kind of young enough. And he seems like a bright kid that he can kind of turn the corner on what's kind of been an underwhelming career so far out there. So there are other aspects to the team, though, most notably Kayvon Thibodeau being drafted to the defensive line, joining the defensive end that they took last year after we were told that they did not need defensive linemen. They've doubled up. Congratulations, Drew. So how do you kind of view this? Because they did lose some pieces, most notably like in the secondary. Their secondary does look relatively rough from that kind of perspective. But what are some like areas concerned on the defense? And do you think this defensive line, the resources they've kind of poured into it, is going to be enough to kind of overcome some of those deficiencies elsewhere in that defense?
I mean, I definitely think the defensive line is solid. Like we gotta love the interior with Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, and then Azeez Ojulari was a favorite of mine last year, just as a pure pass rusher, and he had a decent, he did a decent year at least from a sack standpoint last year, and then pairing up with Kayvon Thibodeau, I think that's solid. But outside of that, I mean, you went from you went from James Bradbury to Adoree Jackson as being your number one corner, and and then on top of that, with the safety room, there not being a lot to look at there either. Really, just beyond the defensive line in general, the defense worries me. So, I don't expect this to be a very good defense personally.
I tend to agree with Drew. I think they're also playing in a division where two of the other teams have extremely well put together offensive lines. And the division is very heavy on running. I think that changes this season too. We'll get with that with some of the other teams. That secondary is going to get torched quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think this is kind of, I think they're clearly in I don't necessarily want to say like a rebuild because I think they do have like a lot of talented pieces there for it to be a complete rebuild, but it's kind of like a pseudo like rebuild where it's like, we want to figure out, do we have the quarterback of the future? Do we have the guy there? And then once we figure that out, then I think they can kind of like fill in the blanks around that. But until they know that they have that guy, I don't know how far they're actually going to go. I don't think it's a 4-win team like it was last year. I do think they're better than 4 wins. But I don't think they're ready to compete in the division, but you never know. It's the NFC East. There's stranger things that have happened in that division. And as we know, it's almost damn near impossible to repeat as a division champion. All right, so now let's get on to the team that finished third last year. One of my favorite teams in the division, one of my favorite teams in the division, and that's strictly because they did such a big favor and that is the Washington Commanders. Obviously, the big news coming out of there is the addition of Carson Wentz at the quarterback position, but also added guys like Trey Turner, Andrew Norwell along that offensive line. Justin Hamilton and Alex Erickson are other additions. They did lose Brandon Scherf, which is a pretty big loss along that offensive line. Matt Ioannidis, Tim Settle, DeAndre Carter, Ricky Seals-Jones, Jamil Douglas, Kyle Allen, Landon Collins, Eric Flowers, John Bostic, and Adam Humphreys, who somehow just always kind of, was good for 3 catches and, 30, 40 yards a game. They did have a relatively decent draft as well. They drafted Jahan Dotson in the first round, then ended up with Fedarian Mathis, Brian Robinson, the running back, Percy Butler, Cole Turner, Sam Howell, the quarterback out of North Carolina, Chris Paul, not the guard in the NBA, but this different guy, and then Christian Holmes as well, leading the tail end of that draft class. So, guys, let's just get right into it. Let's get into. I'm not gonna make everybody wait. Carson Wentz. So they go from Taylor Heineke now, going over to Carson Wentz. Ended up, basically, like I said, doing the Colts a big favor by not only trading more assets for him, but also taking on the entire contract as well. So how do you, after last year, because everybody, like I said, everybody looks at the base numbers and they're like, well, this guy, 3,400 yards, 27 touchdowns, only 7 picks. Seems like he played relatively well in spurts. Is this a guy that Washington, because I think when you look at the roster as a whole, it is a very talented roster. They have decent weapons there, a little unproven, but they still have decent weapons. They got a good offensive line. They got a ton of running backs that, for whatever reason, they refuse to use correctly. Looking at you, Antonio Gibson, hurry up and get out as soon as you can. And then the defense, obviously the defensive line was disappointing last year. It's, a very stacked defensive line, stacked with really high draft picks and really talented guys that just underperformed. But then they also they've got a decent second. It's not a world beater, but they've got decent secondary, good linebackers there. One of our favorite linebackers they drafted last year played really well there in Jamin Davis. And this does seem like a team that very similar situation to where the Colts were last year, where you've got all the pieces around. You just need the quarterback to kind of take you over the hump. We saw how that played out for the Colts last year. How is this stop going to be any different to you with the Carson Wentz? I don't really know what to call it. I guess enigma, saga. I don't know what do you even call this at this point? How does this play out differently for Washington than it has in Philadelphia, than it has in Indianapolis? Or do you think it does play out the same way?
I'll let the other guy that had to go through the Carson Wentz experience personally and emotionally address that first.
I'm here with you. Let it out. Let it out. Unleash, Jared.
So, my personal feelings on the whole thing is he more talented than Tyler Heineke? Heineke. Yes, Taylor Heineke. He is more talented. He's more talented than a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL. On a talent level, the guy is very talented. I question everything during that season, man. And then you got reports from Philadelphia locker rooms too. He's not a leader. I do feel like Washington has the right head coach for a player like Carson Wentz to maybe turn it around. Do I see it happening? No. Do I think it's a disaster? Most likely. And we talk about Daniel Jones and the possibility of him, not starting in the NFL. If this year becomes a disaster like last season and the season before that with Philadelphia, because his numbers with Philly his last year there was terrible, absolutely awful. And a lot of people blame the offensive line. Well, he goes to Indianapolis and all they have to do is beat Jacksonville to make the playoffs. And the guy, he didn't come through. The game was, it's almost like he just gave up in the game. I don't know. I don't see it working out, and I'm not trying to be a Carson Wentz hater and jump on the bandwagon like everyone else that thinks he's just the worst. I don't think he's the worst player in the NFL by any means, but I just don't see it working out, man. I think Washington is in for a tough season.
Yeah, I think like the only part of that I would really like kind of disagree with is like the whole Ron Rivera thing, because like you said, like, well, like he's got a coach that he could possibly turn around with. I think we heard the same thing last year with Frank Reich. And I think with his relationship to Frank Reich,
I think Frank Reich was too invested in Carson Wentz.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Is like
Ron Rivera doesn't have a relationship with him.
You like a son. Well, so I think personally, I would agree he was like really invested, because without Frank Reich, Carson Wentz isn't even wearing the uniform. But I think if you look at the play calling from the head coaching perspective, that tells you a lot more than what necessarily, the words and the press conferences do. Because especially about the last 8 weeks of the season, it seemed like Indianapolis did everything they could to minimize his impacts on the field. You had games where, like the Patriots game, they ended up winning, on the back of Jonathan Taylor. The guy threw for 50 yards. He only attempted like 11 pass attempts in the whole game. Then he had another game. He only threw the ball 23 times. Like, it seemed like they were constantly, basically trying to hide him in the offense. And I think that tells you a lot more than what you hear in the press conferences or what you hear in the media. Is if you actually go back and watch the games, like you could tell, like they were scared of their quarterback. They were scared of him.
Yeah, and everyone, they didn't make the playoffs with him last year, and they have an elite offensive line and the best running back in football. He's going to Washington. They don't have an elite offensive line, and they don't have the best running back. I
don't think the Colts offensive line played elite last year. I think Washington's offensive line is, I don't know if it's as talented across the, I don't think it's as top heavy as Indy's is, because they don't have a Quentin Nelson guy there. But I do think overall, I think they're actually kind of similar offensive lines. Washington did grade out slightly better last year in pass protection than Indianapolis did. Obviously, the Colts had one of the best run blocking lines in football. But I do think it's possibly a now, like I said, they did lose some guys along that, like Brandon Scherf. Like, that's a big loss for them.
It is. They brought in Andrew Norwell, who was a former All-Pro. They brought in Trey Turner, who was a former Pro Bowler.
It's not like the cupboard's bare there. I think they do have a good offensive line.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if it's as top heavy as the Colts, because I don't think they have a guy as good as Quentin Nelson. I don't think they have a guy as good as Ryan Kelly or Braden Smith. But I think, as a
Norwell
unit,
probably in that next group.
Yeah, maybe, like, I don't know. Maybe Braden Smith. Like, Braden Smith's a top 10 right tackle in the league. So,
and Norwell's.
I don't know if Andrew Norwell's
a little different
top 10 guard, but like, they do have talent, I think, along the line as a whole there. So I don't think it's a bad offensive line. And it's not, the way I look at it is, it's like I said, like, it's a very similar situation to where he went last year in Indy. The only difference is now you don't have a coach who's going to call, Frank Reich was trying to do everything he could to, and I think he did a relatively good. Anytime you can get 27-7 out of a guy, you did a heck of a job, numbers wise. But I think it was the other areas, like Jared was pointing out, that he lacked, whether it was the leadership, it was rallying guys whenever they were in deficit, it was commanding the huddle, some of the other, bigger parts of being a quarterback in the NFL that he did lack on, because Lord knows the dude's got talent just out the wazoo, like huge arm, mobile, stand in the pocket. He can make plays out of nothing. And there'll be 2 or 3 times a game where he'll make a play and you're sitting there and you're like, man, like, there's probably only like 3 guys on the whole planet that can make that exact play. Maybe Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and that's probably about it. And then you have Carson Wentz. And then the whole rest of the game, you're sitting there and you got your hands in the air and you're just like, what are you doing? What are you like? What's going on here? So it'll be curious to see how this plays out, because I do think this, like, I mean, there were people saying last year that if it didn't work in Indy, it wasn't going to work anywhere. Well, it clearly didn't work in Indy. Now we're going to test that theory out. Is it going to work? So, Drew, as you know, as I've known you, you've always been kind of a Carson Wentz apologist. Like, I know you kind of fell
Used to
off
be.
that. Yeah, I know you kind of fell off that, but I'm curious, like, because you probably are a little bit more unbiased towards Carson Wentz, because you have two spurned Colts fans here that watch their whole season fall apart. So you
Sure.
could probably look at this a little bit, through a better lens than me and Jared could. So shine some light on the Carson Wentz move, and whether you think this is successful for Washington, or whether you think it just, because it only goes two ways to me. It's either going to be a successful move for them, or it's going to crash and burn spectacularly.
I don't. I kind of lean somewhere in the middle, to be honest with you. I don't think it necessarily has to be a crash and burn, but I do think, I have been a Carson Wentz apologist, and I did say that, prior to last season, I was one of those people that was saying if anybody can fix Carson Wentz, it's going to be Frank Reich. He had his best years with Frank Reich calling his plays. He's in a good situation with a good offensive line, a good running game. The weapons, could have been better last year, but Michael Pittman is a stud. But that I just figured for Wentz at this point in his career probably wasn't going to get any better than what he had in Indy last year. And going to Washington, I still believe that's the case. I don't think Washington with this year's roster is a better situation than Indy with last year's roster was. Now I do think that Washington with Carson Wentz is better than Washington with Taylor Heineke. And I do like their first round receiver Jahan Dotson. Obviously, we love Terry McLaurin, and they've got three pretty talented running backs. One really talented running back that they just refuse to use for whatever reason.
There's a couple injury-prone guys there too that I do think, if healthy, like I do think Curtis Samuel,
yeah,
and Logan Thomas as well, the tight end,
yeah.
is relatively talented. But both those guys, they just can't seem to stay on the field. So we'll see if that kind of plays.
They played most of the season without Chase Young last year too.
They were missing Chase Young and Montez Sweat, which is their two best edge rushers. I think they both missed at least 7 games last year.
Yeah.
I think Chase Young might have been 8. So they need the injury bug to work in their favor. But honestly, I think the big thing, like just looking at it big picture, Washington they play a third place schedule. If you look at it on paper, the schedule isn't that difficult. And to me, the NFC is very top heavy. So it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world if Washington was the last playoff team in the NFC. I doubt that I predict that to happen whenever it comes time for us to make those predictions. But just with the roster they have, with the schedule they have, and then being in the NFC instead of being in the AFC, like Wentz had to deal with last year. I wouldn't be like, oh my God, I can't believe Washington pulled that off, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they missed the playoffs either. But I've kind of gotten to the point with Wentz where he's fine, but if he couldn't take that Indianapolis team to the playoffs last year, I don't think he's going to elevate a team and take them to the Super Bowl or anything like that at this point. I think he's better than Daniel Jones, but I think he is on his way to also being a bridge quarterback similar to Daniel Jones. I think that they're probably on the same track at this point. It to me.
Yeah, Jared, you got anything to add? You got anything?
No. Something else, I just thought about this, kind of a similar situation. The quarterback that's in a relative, like the same predicament was last year was Cam Newton. Cam Newton won an MVP. Cam Newton's got all this talent. Cam Newton had a hard time getting a job during the season, and Carson Wentz is almost at that same point where if they choke the season coming up and then the following season, there's a good chance that Carson Wentz doesn't start in the NFL anymore.
Yeah, it's the NFL is such a weird kind of thing because it really is so talent rich, and if you have the talent, you're afforded so many more opportunities as we've seen. And to be a head coach in the NFL, you do have to be a little bit egotistical. So you're always going to Carson Wentz is always a guy that teams are going to be like, well, I know it didn't, work out for them, but
I can make it work.
Yeah, could it work? Yeah, could it work out for us? I think I could fix him, because you look at the raw talent of a guy like that, and it's tantalizing. He can make every throw in the book. He's mobile. He's got a big arm. He's just uber talented, and somewhere in between where his brain is and where his arm is, there's a misfire between like something's misfiring there. So I don't know. Like, I do think he is who he is at this point. He's approaching 30. Like, he's 30 years old basically. Like, you are who you are as a quarterback at that point, for better or for worse. But that being said, like, I do think he is afforded opportunities because he is as talented as anybody in the entire NFL. So it'll be interesting to see. This is one of my teams to watch, obviously, and it's not just because if Carson Wentz plays 70% of the snaps, we get their second round pick. It is because it is a very enigmatic roster where they are very talented at multiple spots. And if all that talent works out, then yeah, like, I could see this team making the playoffs. I could see them making a run, but they also have the ability to, like I said, fail spectacularly. Like, it's the ultimate crash and burn roster, probably in the NFC to me. Like, out of all the rosters in the NFC, like, this has the biggest swing of, could this team win 2 games? Yes. Could this team win 12 games? Yes.
See, if Wentz is healthy, I think their floor is higher than that. Like, yeah. I don't think there's any way they're like a 2, 3, 4-win team. That would shock me. Like, that would shock me.
I'm saying though, it is within the realm of possibilities to me. Like, it's like last year. I mean, like, they get hurt. These guys are,
I know, man. I just can't, like, if they can win 7 games with Taylor Heineke and without Chase Young and Montez Sweat, assuming health, I just can't see them getting worse.
Wow.
Like, that would be pretty surprising.
Let's put a damper on anything, but I will say Taylor Heineke, higher completion percentage and more yards last year than Carson Wentz. So
maybe they should have just stuck with him then instead of trading those picks and taking on that contract.
I'm glad they didn't. So let's move on now to our team in third place. Last year, a team who did
second place. Yeah,
I'm sorry. They did make the playoffs, and they had a heck of an off season, as this team usually ends up doing. Like, this is one of my favorite off seasons as a whole in the NFL, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles, obviously, huge fan of the A.J. Brown trade. I thought they did absolutely fantastic there. But, bravo, Philadelphia. Thank you. So made the big move for A.J. Brown. Then went out, signed division rival James Bradbury away from the Giants. Hassan Reddick is there, another guy I really liked. Had a couple of good years for the Panthers. Kazir White, Zach Pascal joining them from the Colts, and just Quisky Tart, who's one of Andrew's favorite players, is now joining them as well in the safety room. The losses, they did lose Hassan Ridgeway, Jordan Howard, Jannard Avery, Steven Nelson, Alex Singleton, Rodley McLeod, and Brandon Brooks did retire due to a multitude of injuries, but he's a really great guard. But they had a really good draft, man. Jordan Davis, the behemoth coming from Georgia, is there. Cam Jurgens, Nakobe Dean as well, Kyron Johnson, and Grant Calcaterra winding up the end of that draft class. So basically, guys, to me, this team has the most talent in this division. When I look at this roster from top to bottom, great offensive line, great weapons, really good tight end, good, one of the best running games in football last year. Then you look on the defensive side, pretty, Darius Slade, James Bradbury, as talented as secondary pieces as there are. then their defensive line is just monstrous. They have some pretty decent
Yeah.
linebacker depth. I mean, this is a team that is just completely stacked, except like we've talked about, previously with some of these other, teams, the quarterback position. That's the biggest question mark on the team is Jalen Hurts, that guy or him? Like that's what the kids say. Like, is he him? So that's the question for you guys. Like once again, like similar, like it seems like we're always running back to these quarterbacks, but that seems to be what the hangup is in this whole division is the quarterback position. Because all these teams have talent everywhere, except they have major questions at that one spot. So that's the question for you is like Jalen Hurts, is he him?
This is the one in the division that I really struggle with. Like Carson Wentz, Daniel Jones, I feel pretty comfortable saying that like those guys, those aren't your guy. They're not him. They're not taking you. They're not taking
You're not
you
that
there.
guy, pal.
You're not that guy, pal. Yeah, like I feel comfortable saying that. I can't be that confident with Jalen Hurts. I mean, and I don't want to be because the reality is I like Jalen Hurts. So, I want him to be good. But I mean, he's improved each year going back to college. The dude's a hard worker and he's got a really talented roster around him. So I really want to see him succeed, and I hope he does. But it's really tough. You obviously you've got to see more from him as a passer this year, and they've definitely set him up to do so by adding AJ Brown to an already extremely talented Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, the guys that you touched on earlier. Like they've got the offensive line, they've got the pieces, everything's in place for Jalen Hurts to show them and show us. It doesn't matter if he shows us or not, but to show his front office, his coaching staff, if he's him or not. And he's one that I'm definitely rooting for personally. So, a little bit biased, I guess you could say. But, yeah, he's the one guy in this division I really have a hard time trying to figure out which way I lean in terms of where he's at. But I'm hoping he just continues to improve and we see more from him as a passer this year.
Big Jared?
Yeah. I think this is a year he does take a step forward. I think Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown's a big deal, man. Like that's a huge deal. It's going to help. It really is. It's going to help him out tremendously. And last year, Philly started out the season. They were passing the ball a lot more, and then towards the middle of the season, they changed up their offense altogether, and they went more towards a run-heavy offense. I definitely feel like it's going to be a balanced offense this season, but I look for them to pass. They didn't go out and just get AJ Brown to not throw the football. Like they're going to pass a lot more than what they did last year. And I think they do have a little bit more faith in Jalen Hurts than what we think. Obviously, they've loaded him up with talent. Yep. Goddard's a great tight end. Kenneth Gainwell in the backfield. Drew, thank you again.
Yep. Yeah, I love me some Kenny Gainwell, man.
But they've got talent in the backfield. Defense is solid. To me, they're kind of like the Chargers and some of these other teams. Maybe not to the extent of the Chargers, but they made a lot of off-season moves that are really beneficial to that team. They're definitely. I think they're the team to beat in that division. Kind of spoiler alert, but that's it.
Yeah, I'm also I'm a big Jalen Hurts fan. Love the person, love the player. He's a guy that literally has been counted out, even like from high school. Like the moment he stepped on college, it was, can this guy be a college quarterback? Well, he goes out, wins a Heisman, national champion. Then it's, can he play quarterback in the NFL? And he's done nothing but produce results. Every time he's gotten a shot anywhere, this is a guy that does nothing but produce. And he's a great leader, from everything you hear. Like, it seems like AJ Brown is really enamored with him, now like they're really close. And it's really exciting to watch. I'm also a big Jalen Hurts guy, so I'm definitely rooting for him. I do see him taking a step forward as well, just because, like I said, this guy's improved everywhere he's been every single year. There's no reason for me to think that is not going to continue. And if he does end up taking that step, he has the weapons at his disposal. He has the the team as a whole at his disposal to make some noise in the NFL. And he's a guy that wins everywhere he goes. I know that's like cliche, quarterback wins, all that stuff. Like, we don't play that game a lot here, but on some level, like it is kind of true. Like he does seem to have guys that rally around him, and you want to play winning football for a guy like that, and that does play a role sometimes. So, yeah, I'm excited to watch this team. I'm excited for the fan base there because say what you want about Eagles fans, like they really are some of the most passionate.
They're
fans.
very passionate. Yeah,
The most passionate fans in all of sports are Philadelphia Eagles fans, and some really great ones too. I mean, like I've had my run in with a few of them with the whole like Wentz thing last year, but I've also like had some really, really, really good conversations with a lot of them. And a shout out to not only the best Eagles fan, but one of the best fans in general, and that is the boy Giovanni, the podcaster. If you're on Twitter, follow him. Just absolute bomb
great kid.
person. I mean, just a great kid, man. Like,
Yeah,
so great. And we're really excited too to have him now in Indianapolis. If you didn't know, he does live in Indianapolis now. He did move there, and he's going to be at training camp. I believe this week he'll be at Colts training camp. So we're looking forward to having
That's
him
cool.
out there as well, rooting on the Colts. And he's an awesome kid, man. So one of my absolute favorite people on planet Earth. Shout out to Giovanni. If you're not following him on Twitter, you're missing out. It's at Giovanni the podcaster, and we're rooting for your Eagles this year, buddy. So now let's get on to the team that did win the division last year, double-digit wins. Seems like we do this every year. This is the team to beat. This is the team to beat. This is the team to beat. They get into the playoffs, or they miss the playoffs completely, and they fold. Like this is one of, I would say, the biggest underachieving teams of the last 30 years in all of sports, and that's the Dallas Cowboys, because we hear the hype train every year and they consistently let everybody down. So just before we go into how their offseason or how their season looks to us, let's take a look at their offseason, because they didn't really do a lot. Like they seemed to lose a lot, and they didn't really do much to stop that. And it was kind of weird sitting back and watching, because it's, you're watching like this contributor leave, this contributor. And like, these weren't like small contributors. These were big time contributors to this team over the last few years. And they're gone. And you're sitting there, it's like, well, like, what are they going to do to replace this guy? And they did nothing. They sat on their hands. So their big key additions on the year are James Washington, the wide receiver, and Dante Fowler. Like that's the most notable names they've added.
I mean, the real notable one was the fact that they used their first-round pick on on somebody that'll probably be their starting right tackle, Tyrone Smith. Like, because I mean, that's their big losses were on both sides of the line. They lost La'el Collins and Connor.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just talking about like free agent additions.
No, I'm just saying I agree with you. Like the free agency signings that they brought in were underwhelming, to the point to where like you have to go to the draft to find their big additions, because to your point, there really weren't any in terms of free agency, and they lost significant contributors on
so like
both offensive line and defensive line.
Yeah, so listen to the losses here for this team: Amari Cooper, Randy Gregory, La'el Collins, Connor Williams, Cedric Wilson, Keanu Neal, Blake Jarwin, Greg Zuerlein. Those are rough. I mean, like those aren't small contributors to the team. And they didn't really do much to replace that. So to Drew's point here, where their draft, Tyler Smith, the offensive tackle, Sam Williams, Jalen Tolbert, who we do like at wide receiver, Jake Ferguson, Matt Waletzko, Deron Bland, Damon Clark, John Ridgway, and Devin Harper. So they're counting a lot on these rookies, and as we know, like that's not really a good formula, especially for a team like Dallas, who they haven't really seemed to like develop their own guys. It seems like they've always been in the market of, hey, let's make this big trade for Amari Cooper. Hey, let's make this big trade for this guy. Let's bring in La'el Collins. Let's bring in these type of guys. So for a team that underachieved last year, relatively in the postseason, that is, they won 12 games. They played really well. Dak Prescott looked healthy. Like, that's a positive. Zeke was out there. Tony Pollard emerged. CeeDee Lamb is still there. Where does this team go from here? Because I don't necessarily know. Like, I think they're a lot worse than they were last year.
Well, they are. Roster-wise, they are.
Yeah, so I mean, like, your division gets better, relatively speaking, with Washington. Who knows what happens there? But I do think Washington's a better team, than they were last year. Philadelphia, we think the Giants are a better team than they were last year, just off the aspect of, head coach hire. Like, we think that's a pretty big thing there. So we all see like relatively positive additions on all three of the other teams. And all we see in this team is a negative addition or subtraction. I guess you can't have negative addition. That would be subtraction. Obviously, I'm not a math guy. I hate math. I'm much more of an English history buff. So, yeah, like, where does this team go from here, guys? Like, I'm curious to hear your take on the Cowboys with the way this offseason played out.
I still think their offense is in a good spot. Like, obviously losing Amari Cooper hurts, but like Zeke and Pollard is still a solid running back duo. I think CeeDee Lamb takes another step forward this year, and shows that he is a true number one receiver in the league. Michael Gallup is a lot better than what people give him credit for. I feel like now obviously he's going to miss some games to start the year, but
I believe it came out today that he said it would. Like, there's almost no shot he plays week 1. So,
right. Yeah. So that is disappointing that he won't be out there for the start of the year. But and then as you mentioned, we like the rookie Jalen Tolbert, but obviously you lose Amari Cooper, your wide receiver room is going to take a step back. Amari Cooper's really talented, and then the offensive line. Assuming health, I still think the offensive line can be fine even with the losses that they had. Like, I'm not concerned about the offense, and I'm a Dak fan too. I don't think he's like a top 5 quarterback in the league or anything like that, but I think you can win with Dak. But what concerns me is the defensive side of the ball. They've got like DeMarcus Lawrence, Micah Parsons, Trevon Diggs. They've got some star power.
Well, DeMarcus Lawrence looked really, really underwhelmed last year. Like, he did not look good.
And he's going to have to step up with Randy Gregory out. With him gone now, but yeah, they've got some star power on defense, but then I also think they have holes, and I don't really think the depth is there necessarily on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm not too worried about the offense, but the defense does scare me for this team.
This whole team to me is taking a step back. I do believe CeeDee Lamb he's gonna be the one that shines this year as far as like the standout player on the offense. Man, I don't know what Zeke is anymore. I don't. And I think that they're at a point too where they're kind of, you're talking about Carson Wentz and the teams like all these teams are like, oh, we can make this guy. It'll be different with us. Tony Pollard right now might be the better running back, and they're not utilizing that correctly. I think Prescott will be fine. The defense has got holes. I don't know, man. The Cowboys, their offseason was weird. It was one of the weirdest ones. I actually thought it would go the other way, where they would have went out and spent a bunch of money and tried to bring in some people, let Cooper go wherever he wanted to go, and then spend up on defense. But no, I don't know where to have this team outside of. We'll do our rankings in a second, but it's weird. Like, they're in a weird spot.
Zeke is another guy I find myself defending, just because before he had the PCL injury, he looked like normal Zeke last year. Like, the first 4, I think he got injured in week 5, but up to the point in his injury, the first 5 weeks of the year, he looked great to me. And I think, assuming he's back to full health again this year, I think he'll, I think he's being slept on a little bit. I do think Tony Pollard is the better pass catcher, and he's more explosive than Zeke. But Zeke might be the best pass blocking running back in the entire league. And then on top of that, I think he's the better pure runner. I think he's a better pure runner than Pollard. He doesn't have the explosiveness, but just in terms of being a pure runner, I do think Zeke is still better. I think they complement each other really well if they would just use them in that aspect. Like I think that their skill sets could really complement each other, and especially with losing Amari Cooper, if you could line Pollard up like in the in the slot, or having both running backs on the field at the same time, like I think there's a way to where it doesn't have to be one or the other, and I think the offense would be better for it if they were to approach it that way. But I do think Zeke's being slept on a little bit, because in our minds, like the last time we watched Zeke on the field, it didn't look good. But that's just
No, it looked
because
bad. I
that,
mean, he
that's
looked
because
slow and
Zeke is
he was hurt. Yeah.
he is an animal, and the dude plays through injury, for better or for worse. And so in our minds, the last picture of watching Zeke didn't look good. But the reality is you have to go all the way back to week 4 of last year to really get to see what healthy Zeke looked like. And if you go back and watch it, he looked damn good. So assuming he's back to full health, I have no reason to believe, like, until he just shows me when he's fully healthy that he's washed. I can't really count him out yet, because whenever he's fully healthy, the dude still looks like one of the better running backs in the league to me.
Yeah, I don't know, Wayne, if you touched on it right at the beginning. I can't remember, but they let some receivers go. I was kind of shocked that they let go too, like Cedric Wilson. Like, I really felt like with Amari Cooper leaving, he would have stayed with the team. Noah Brown's gone. Like, I know these aren't like household names or anything, but at the same time, like, it's literally CeeDee Lamb and that's it. Like, because Gallup's going to miss at least week 1, and
I think at least 4. I think at least 4 weeks.
They're definitely going to be counting on Jalen Tolbert out the gate for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's a rookie wide receiver. They're going to have to, because they're going to have someone else.
And then they've got Dalton Schultz on the franchise tag as well. He's going to have to play a big role in the offense from day 1 too.
There's this their offseason it was one of the more weird ones of any team.
It was very weird.
I agree.
They're a 12-5 team too.
Well, plus on top of that, like, how much do you really believe in Mike McCarthy as a head coach to get the most out of these guys?
Yeah, that's another issue I've got with the team.
Yeah,
I'm not a big Mike McCarthy guy.
I'm not a huge fan either. All right, so look, we're winding down here. We've hit on all these teams for good or for better or for worse. How we think this plays out. Let's go ahead and get our predictions here. I'm curious to see how you guys have this division, because this was a difficult one for me. Like, I've been going back and forth even during the show. Like, I thought I had it figured out before we hit record. We've been sitting here talking about it, and I'm just like, man, like, I don't know where I'm going to go. So I'm curious to see where you guys go with this. I'm going to go ahead and give this, because this might be a little bit of a hot take here. I'm going to food for thought. So I have the Eagles winning this division this year. I don't necessarily think that's a hot take. I think the hot take is I have Washington coming in second. And I think –
yeah, that's probably going to be a hot take.
Yeah, and I think the Cowboys finish third in this division. And then I think the Giants, end up bringing it in the rear. But I just think overall as a team, Washington is better. Like, I think they have a better roster overall. And – I trust, not that I necessarily trust Carson Wentz, because I don't trust Carson Wentz, and I don't think these teams make the playoffs. I think the Eagles are the only team that makes the playoffs in this division. But it's tough, because while I don't necessarily trust Carson Wentz, I trust Ron Rivera with a talented roster more than I trust Mike McCarthy with this Cowboys roster and what they've lost and how they're going to replace some of this, like, major contributors. I think CeeDee Lamb's really good. I think Zeke's good, but I don't really know. I mean, generally you don't get healthier the older you get at that position. Generally, once you start breaking down, it kind of continues. It becomes a trend. It's not something that, you don't get healthier the older you get at running back. And the fact that he's already had some injuries pile up over the last couple of years, I don't think that's going to stop. I do like Tony Pollard a lot, though. Their offensive line in Dallas gives me some questions. Outside of Zach Martin, I know, the left tackle there, Smith.
Smith, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's great when
solid as long
healthy.
as he's out there.
Exactly, but he hasn't been out there. And if he's gone, I mean, it's Zach Martin or bust right now because you don't know how that rookie's going to play. That's one of the hardest positions for a rookie to step in and be impactful. And to be completely honest, man, I've never been sold on Dak. Like I think Dak is like talented. Like I like Dak as a quarterback. I've never been sold on this whole like, well, he's one of the the top 8 quarterbacks in the league or one of the top 10 quarterbacks.
I think he's borderline top 10, but
I would give him borderline there, but
he's not top. He's not
a
top
guy.
8.
He's not a guy that I think is going to raise your. I think if you have a talented roster around him, you can win with it. But with what they've lost this year, I think some of Dak's flaws are really going to start to show. And he's going to be asked to carry a lot of this team. And I'm just not totally bought in. I think, for as talented and enigmatic as Carson Wentz is, I do think he's got a much stronger support system in Washington. Now, like I said, that doesn't mean I'm picking them to make the playoffs, but I don't know. It's just a strange division. So my picks, and I'll let you guys get to yours. I've got the Eagles, the Commanders, the Cowboys bringing in third, and then I have the New York Giants bringing in fourth. Because as we know, man, the NFC East, it's a wild division, dude. It changes every year. Like it's crazy. So, how do you guys think this plays out?
Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, I was with you for a little bit. I got the Eagles winning the division. I think that they definitely upgraded the team, and they were a playoff team last year. I got them winning the division. I have Dallas in second, Washington in third, and New York in fourth. I can tell you, though, Landon, if Dallas finishes third in that division, Mike McCarthy will not be their head coach next season.
No, I agree. I agree.
That is 100% fact.
It seems
Jerry
like they're
Jones,
making the long play for Sean Payton anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Jerry Jones doesn't let coaches go during the season, but that he will not be the head coach the following year. There's not a whole lot to touch on. I think the Eagles definitely had the better offseason than any team in that division. Like I stated, they were a playoff team last year. I think the Cowboys lost a lot of players, key players to that team. I still have them over Washington. And a lot of that, to kind of defend Dak, I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback either. I will say he is coming back. Last year was his first year back from one of the most gruesome injuries in the history of the NFL. I mean, it was nasty. So he's got a full year now where he's not having to worry about injury per se. I mean, you're always one hit away, but I mean, for him to even, man, like him, like even coming back at the player he was last year, I think one more year removed from that injury, he's only going to be better. He's going to be asked to do a lot more. The offense is definitely going to run through him more than what it has the running game in the past. Because I do think Elliott, I don't think he's washed. But like you said, he's not getting any younger. That is a major injury for a running back. And the team is not as talented on the second side of the ball on the defensive end. So they're going to play games where they're going to have to pass more. But I can't put the Cowboys at third on the grounds that I have no faith whatsoever in Carson Wentz. Like none. So.
Yeah, I'm right in line with Jared. I've got the Eagles winning the division as well, so that's a clean sweep for the pod for the NFC East. But then I do have Dallas coming in at second, Washington at third, and the New York Giants at fourth. I think a lot of the same arguments for Washington finishing ahead of Dallas this year for second place are some of the same arguments that were being made for them to finish ahead of Dallas for first place last year. Now, granted, that was assuming Ryan Fitzpatrick was going to be quarterback at the start of the year before the injury happened. Whenever those arguments were being made on the internet and on our show too. I think it's a pretty similar situation, and I still Carson Wentz is better than Taylor Heineke, but I still don't think it's enough to close the gap necessarily, even with the losses that Dallas had. But I think Philadelphia should be extremely excited, and the obvious AJ Brown addition is a huge one. But
yes, it is.
But on the other side of the ball, that's what really blows me away. Like adding Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean through the draft. Hassan Reddick was such a great signing, and
Yeah.
James Bradbury was such a great signing. Like they really, between the draft and free agency, they really improved that defense to me, and made this a really complete team. So obviously it really just comes down to the quarterback play, and like both of you, I do think Jalen Hurts takes a step forward, and even if it's not a step forward to putting him into like the elite, I think it'll be good enough with the roster around him to where they're going to end up winning this division. But I haven't completely. I've got my division winners for all the divisions, but I haven't finished ironing out the playoff teams. But I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up having Dallas in the playoffs. Just with the NFC being so top heavy, the wild card teams are I think if you ask 10 different people who the wild card teams in the NFC are going to be, you might get 10 different answers. So that I think that's going to be interesting to watch this year. But I won't be shocked if I end up having Dallas in the playoffs. But I do have Philly win. So I got Philly, Dallas, Washington, New York.
All right. Well, that gives you our picks there. Really excited to see how you guys pick this division as well. So go ahead, if you're watching on YouTube, drop that down in the comments. Let us know how your division plays off here in the NFC, how you think these teams are going to finish. And we want to thank you guys for watching. We are anywhere you can find podcasts, anywhere you can do, our YouTube channel. Make sure to follow us on Twitter as well, at 3Man Rush Podcast, where you can find all three of us there as well for our own personal Twitter pages. You can interact with us. We're pretty active on there, talking back and forth. And you can also join our Discord, which has been a really fun thing that we've been doing. Yeah. It's been really good conversations as well. So
been running some mock drafts in there too. Fantasy season is like redraft season is like a month away, man, and the mock drafts have been running in there too. So, yes. if you want to mock draft with real people and not just computers all the time, hop in there and run some mock drafts with us.
Yeah, we did a fun one. We did an IDP mock draft where we are starting a 3-man rush. Our podcast is presenting a mock draft, or not a mock draft, but a IDP dynasty league. Going to be really fun as well. So I'm sure we will have that posted up on the YouTube whenever we do decide the draft. Probably won't be a podcast thing, but it's definitely just a little resource
content.
Yeah, just cool content for you guys to watch. And that being said, we're going to continue our divisional previews next week as well. We're getting right there, and we'll probably be recording next Thursday. Meanwhile, while the Hall of Fame game is on, watching some football. Super excited, and I'm not going to make you guys wait any longer on when we're going to get to this division. We're kicking off with the South next week as well, with the AFC South starting early in the week. We're going to go ahead and knock this out. It's going to be super fun. I personally am very excited to talk about it, especially this year, because I know kind of where Drew's head's at as well. So it's going to be a really fun show for you guys, especially if you know me. You'll really enjoy that content. So AFC South early next week. Make sure that you have the bell notification on. You can be subscribed as soon as that episode drops. And just thank you guys so much for the support, and we will see you next week.